Ramirez with the Catch Wrestling Alliance, where we keep real wrestling alive. I am here with a very special guest. I'm gonna call you Memo, right?
You can call me Bo. That Matt calls me Bo.
um, so, uh, can
But the
you
name
can
is
you give us?
pronounced Guillermo Xegarra.
Okay, great. I was just gonna say that for people who might see the X and like just be really confused about like what to do and how to pronounce that. But thank you for clearing that up. And so the reason you're here, and this is like a very special episode, is you created the story behind an upcoming comic called Milagro. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So I got together with an artist named Matt Strackmine, who goes by the Letter Hack. We've known each other for a few years now. Matt used to be the art director for what was once called Denver Comic Con and became Pop Culture Classroom. And they had educational comics that they put out for kids for free that you can still find online. So Matt gave me an opportunity to write for them. He asked me about, what would I write? And, in terms of Colorado history, what would I write? And to do a pitch for him. So I had two ideas. I had Jack Dempsey, the boxer, who's from Manassas, Colorado. Unfortunately, they'd already done like an educational comic on him. And then I did one on the Ludlow Massacre. And Matt and I got along great. He's a great guy. He's an incredible artist, an incredible coordinator. And we worked together on and off over the years. We've done a bunch of different projects. Matt had this idea that he came up with. I want to say it was like 2004. He came up with the idea of a luchador vigilante named Milagro. And we talked about it. And Matt's original idea, he had the character, he had the name, and he just had like maybe like 6 or 7 prompts that he gave me. He wanted it to start with a death in the ring. He wanted there to be a motif with roses. He wanted it to take place in Mexico, which I thought was great because, there isn't really a lot of representation for Latinos in comics or particularly Mexicans or Mexican Americans. Like the only ones I can think of are Miles Morales, the other Spider-Man, right? Joaquin Torres, he's going to be the new Falcon and Winter Soldier. There just isn't really that many. So I thought it was really great. Matt gave me the prompts, and then he just let me go. He trusted me because we worked together so many times over the years that he just let me go. He let me create the story. I had it take place in Mexico City, and in my mind, I wanted to do to Lucha Libre what pretty much happened with pro wrestling in Japan, where the lines were blurred between performance art and actual combat sport. And then eventually like actual like street fighting, street self-defense, those types of things. And then we just kind of went from there. And now we are on the verge of funding this awesome project that Matt was kind enough to let me be part of.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go ahead and kind of let people know. So this project is going through kind of like a Kickstarter. So we're basically to be crowdfunded. So that actually got kicked off on Tuesday of this week, right?
Yeah.
And so we've put the link below if you want to chip in. I've also so we'll get into that I've helped out with this project. But just before we get into that, just to let you know, if you do want to help out, the link for the Kickstarter is in the description. It's almost completely funded though, right? So if you want to kind of chip in the last few pennies, or like say, like, we'd say in if you'd say it in Spanish, it's like the centavos, right? So because can you actually give us an update, like where it's at, right?
So
Can you
we're
tell us?
98% funded.
That's
We
awesome.
have $127 to go, which is unbelievable. The support that we've gotten this is just been really wild. I mean, we've gotten support from independent comic creators. We've gotten support from martial artists. We've gotten all kind, and me personally, like I've had so many friends just texting me and messaging me, like just watching this thing go up, and it's really been I'm really moved by all of this. Like I didn't expect it to be quite like this. But yeah, we are almost there, and it's probably, I mean, the odds are it's going to get funded. It could very well get funded while we're having this discussion. And then from there, the next step for us is the stretch goals. So if we can get another 2,000 in funding, our artists Matt and Ross are going to have all kinds of extras that they create, all kinds of stickers and drawings. The details for that are going to be on the website if people want to go look, or on the Kickstarter site. But yeah, I mean, anyone who's seen what these guys can do, Ross is our virtuoso. I joke around, like if we were a power trio or something, Ross would be the guy shredding guitar solos. I mean, he's incredible, and he doesn't have any background in grappling, martial arts, or anything. He's been learning as he goes. He drew kaiju comics. He had a couple of successful comics that he put out on his own called Stomped. So for him, this is a new experience, and man, he has taken to it. He's been watching a lot of your videos just to get a feel and learn how to do this. Those have been really, we'll talk more about that, but those have been really crucial in the creation of the fight scenes and the action scenes in Milagro. So yeah, it's been great, and I'm really moved by all of it.
Yeah, so hopefully people, if they see, or if they go to the link and they see the site and they see the artwork there, it's beautiful. Really, it's really well done. It's very professionally done by high quality artists. So you wouldn't be funding some kind of second rate type thing. This is like pro all the way. But like you were alluding to, so I helped out. I'm like your guys' fight consultant, right?
Yes, you
So,
are.
how about you? Just tell them about that.
Well, I mean, I've trained on and off myself over the years, probably for 20. Oh, damn, I'm getting old. Probably like 25 years now, on and off.
Mhm.
I've had injuries, life, kids, job stuff. Mostly typical MMA blend: boxing, kickboxing, jujitsu, a little bit of judo, a little bit of like wrestling. Although, like you said, like I need to learn more wrestling because I really don't know much wrestling. I didn't wrestle in high school or anything. So I had a little bit of a background. I know enough to be able to put fight scenes together. I know enough to be a good training partner. What I didn't know was how to give it a catch flavor. All of these arts, Bruce Lee said a punch becomes a punch, or a punch is just a punch, right? There's different ways to throw a punch, there's different ways to grapple, there's different approaches to grapple. The moves are essentially the same. It's just how you get there and the approaches and the strategies. So what I really needed for Milagro, for the character, for the anti-hero vigilante that we have, was to represent pro wrestling. And I needed your expertise to be able to help with that. I wanted specific types of takedowns. I wanted, with catch and with wrestling in general, you don't really end up on your back. So I needed to I needed to have those elements in the comic or in the graphic novel. But one of the things, like, I think that's kind of missing in a lot of Western comics is that kind of authenticity. You see that all the time in manga. You see that all the time in anime. Whoever the hell are drawing those things, I mean, they're getting like triangle chokes and all these like
Mhm.
auras and all these different things, and they're really accurate. But you don't really see that level of detail as much in Western comics. So I really wanted to represent that, and I wanted to come to you for that.
Oh, cool. Well, it was a pleasure to work with you. So there's some scenes that I think people will really like that. If they support, then they'll be able to see see how they came out. But yeah, it's like I really agree with the whole authenticity thing that you were mentioning, because yeah, like a lot of comics and even a lot of the movies that come from Western comics and stuff, it's like a lot of striking oriented, right? So which people tend to like be okay with, or it's like really easy for them to understand. So I think that's probably why they do that. But we are seeing, like how you mentioned in some of the Japanese comics and cartoons, um, like it's still really exciting when you add legitimate grappling into it, right? So actually, even on this YouTube channel, we just did a series, I think like 4 videos
Hmm.
just on some of the realistic moves from the anime Attack on Titan, because they tried to do triangle choke. They did a armbar, and what was really cool about the armbar is that it was more catch wrestling like, where
Belly
uh,
down.
yeah, it was belly down, so it
Mhm.
wasn't like going back onto your back, and they followed through. So it's like when Titan ripped off the arm of the other Titan, so it was it was pretty badass. Right? So I had to talk about it because yeah, again, it's like you're not really seeing these types of moves in a lot of pop culture, like comics and cartoons and or live action movies, which they could do these things. And since Milagro has not only the pro wrestling aspect into it, it has like real fighting, like real fight scenes that are out of the ring. So you like when you think about these types of real life fight scenarios, you don't want to be on your back. You know, you get your skull cracked, right? If they slam you down on your back and they start punching you, pounding your head into the pavement, it's not where you want to be.
No. And another thing about Mexico, I mean, obviously, when you think of Mexican combat sports, you have to think about boxing. Some of the greatest, most exciting, most courageous, just incredible fighters come from Mexico. And there's just a fighting spirit with Mexican fighting culture. You say like Mexican fighter, and you have this image of this guy that will not give up. And I wanted to honor that in the comic. We're not really seeing these types of stories in there. So I wanted to have elements of that, and without giving too much away, something that we don't talk much about in this arc. That hopefully, if it's successful, we can explore in future arcs. We saw in Japan there was a parallel between pro wrestling, scripted. I don't like calling it fake, and that's something that I address. You could see that right on the Kickstarter, just within the first 5 pages. It's not fake; it's scripted. Gravity's real. Those falls and those hits and everything are real. But even within that, there's a realistic aspect that was explored in Japan. They went from the scripted pro wrestling to what eventually became MMA. That it became Shuto and Pancrase and Pride and all those great events. And you had some great Japanese fighters with backgrounds in pro wrestling that had done some catch, that had done other things, judo, sambo, and all those other arts in the blend. And in my mind, like what kind of something like that happens in Mexico. There's like this revolution of grappling and combat sports, that comes from like Mexican boxing and Kyokushin karate and catch wrestling and pro wrestling, and I definitely wanted to try to capture that in this fictitious world that Matt was kind enough to let me create.
Yeah, and well, that's kind of the thing about like early days of the like I should say predetermined matches for pro
Mm.
wrestling. So when it was going that way, there were a lot of legit, catch wrestlers or even like grapplers of other styles, who were into it, but say some who did not want to do the predetermined match. They just quit and did other things if they had something to fall back on, another career or whatnot. um, but there were some who really needed that to pay bills or to make money. So um, then they continued. So there was even back then, back around World War I and all that, there were a lot more people who had like this legit background. So that's what I like about Milagro, and that you can kind of think of it in that way, where it's like you have someone with the legit training, who just happens to be doing pro wrestling as well. So because it can be that whole thing where it's like you're a legit person and the career is still kind of combat oriented, but it's still like still a different thing.
Yeah, we saw something like that kind of happen in Brazil with luta libre. There was a whole movement with luta libre that people don't really talk that much about or know that much about. Like up until like I think there was a video. I think it was Didos is what they're called. They put out a video about luta libre. Like up until a few years ago, I didn't know that it was connected to catch wrestling and pro wrestling at all. Like I thought it was like one of the Gracie students kind of went off on their own and took off the gi. Like I had no idea, you know, and
Hmm.
they were doing like no gi MMA grappling. They were doing leg locks and all kinds of things, and they were like the primary rival for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I didn't really, I knew that they were rivals, but I didn't know the origins of it up until just a couple years ago. So
Oh yeah.
this this thing with like pro wrestling and real combat sports is it just seems like it's always kind of been there to some degree, and it's kind of like flourished at different times in different cultures. So in my story, I wanted to make that happen in Mexico.
That's awesome. I mean, like, is like, what about Mexico? Are there anything in particular about Mexico that you try to highlight with regards to like the culture or the cities, or is there anything you kind of want people to
Well,
know about it?
full disclosure, I myself am not Mexican. I am Latin American. I'm part Peruvian. Well, I'm American, but my parents are from Peru and Chile. I grew up in the East Coast, and when I was growing up in the East Coast, there weren't really Mexicans. There were not in New Jersey at the time, or I didn't know any. You know, there weren't that many. It was mostly Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, just completely different culture. I moved to Colorado almost 20 years ago, and I got to know more about Mexican culture, Mexican food. Always been a fan of Mexican fighters, you know, Julio Cesar Chavez, all those guys. And then you started having like Mexican American fighters like Frank Shamrock, you know, guys like that. Cain Velasquez started coming up. And then we would visit Mexico and we would get to know people from that were originally from Mexico. And I just got fascinated with so many aspects of the culture. You know, just like with learning about a lot of cultures, you can start with food. You know, you start looking at architecture. You go to Mexico City, or you go to not necessarily Mexico City, but you go to Mexico, you see the adobe houses, you know, the mustard yellows and the colors and everything. They're just beautiful, you know. So I got fascinated by that just over the years. And then when Matt brought me this character, it just made so much sense to dive into that and to explore that.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so I think a lot of people might not know about know so much about Mexico, especially if they are living in the United States, where you get kind of this distorted uh, portrayal of what it's like to be in Mexico. But yeah, like how you're saying, there's so many beautiful parts, different types of terrain. Where it's like at the north, there's desert because we have that big desert that if you ever been to the Southwest, it's in the it's on both sides of the border, right? But
Yeah.
that ends right with the further south you go, and then the terrain changes completely, and you have different cultures throughout different regions of Mexico. So it's not just like, and you can't just think of just one. You can't think of just like a lot of people associate Aztec or something like that. It's not just that type of thing. There's a wide variety of peoples that live throughout different parts of Mexico.
Yes.
Like to show the reality or show like the vibrancy and like how you mentioned different colors and different. And I think even in LA, we see Los Angeles, we have this influence where um, it's this we call it like Chicano or like Mexican influence, where it's like LA is considered like the city of murals, right? Because there's more murals here than other parts of the United States, and probably even other parts of the world, where maybe be outside of Mexico, right? Because you have this beautification process that kind of goes on where walls get painted beautifully, and there's so much to the culture that I'm happy that you're trying to bring out. Yeah.
Yeah, there. You know, it's funny. Again, with these artists that I get to work with Ross and Matt, I wrote in some mural thing. There's a poverty aspect. The story does take place in Mexico City, in a district called East Tapalapa, which is pretty poor. You know, so I did want to explore some of that, but there is a lot of like mural art throughout the story, and there's even like there's a mention of like an indigenous culture, because there's different indigenous cultures
Mm-hmm.
that are out of Mexico, not just Aztecs that everybody associates with, but there's just so many little aspects about Mexico that really haven't been explored in comics or storytelling that I was hoping to do. And it felt pretty natural to be able to do that with the framework that Matt gave me.
Okay, no, that sounds awesome. So hopefully, yeah, this is interesting to other people if you want to kind of see more of like kind of the real or like the vibrancy of this culture and how it can be connected to catch wrestling because catch wrestling, almost like through pro wrestling, just really, um, went or traveled throughout the world. Really, so it's like the style that emerged from this little village or like this little region in northern England, then like just just dominated the earth, really, because like the style itself, catch as catch can, even those early matches happened all over the world. There were different types of challenge matches, and so like you had Japanese judo and jiu-jitsu people coming to compete, not only in England but the United States and even in the White House, and then as matches move to become more predetermined, I mean, still that style, the predetermined pro wrestling, that is all over the earth, really. I mean, there's all these promotions, not only here in the United States, but if you look at the United States, there's tons, right? There's different regional champions, and there still are smaller regional shows going on all over. I know all over California, Nevada, there's plenty of pro wrestling schools all over the place. So and what it's even like the basis of what's considered like a traditional indigenous practice in Peru, right? They call it the cachican, where the indigenous women do it. They do pro wrestling in their traditional outfits, but they said it's because the British mining companies that went there to mine, that they brought their pro wrestling with them, and so then it just got taken by the indigenous women there, which is really interesting. So you can see how it, and also you mentioned luta libre. We have I interviewed more of an expert, an anthropologist from Brazil, on that, and he actually will be coming back shortly. He wants to like compile some more research for everybody, so he's working on that, and he'll be back on shortly. But that's the thing. There is like how you mentioned, it's like pro wrestling. So if it wasn't even like pure catch wrestling, still pro wrestling, touched the whole world. Especially how you mentioned like the Americas, from north to south. So like to have say like a catch wrestler from Mexico is not it's not unbelievable. It's totally possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the pro wrestling, I mean, look at what it's done in Canada, right? I mean, like Canada has a storied tradition of pro wrestling. Mexico has its own version. Why not take that fantastical leap? Which, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's not that much of a leap, but like, why not take that fantastical leap and turn the performance art of pro wrestling into like the combat sport of pro wrestling and like the defensive sport of pro wrestling? Like the way I use it in Milagro for I guess street defense, street fighting.
Yeah, yeah. How much can you tell us of the story or about the character? Is there any more you can kind of tell us about
Um.
him or the story?
So on the Kickstarter page, you can see that there was another aspect that this was one of the prompts that Matt gave me. Pro wrestling, even scripted or predetermined pro wrestling, had a history of shoots where they actually did real matches. Whether sometimes I guess a lot of times they were in the gym to determine who was going to be a champion or a contender, and sometimes in the ring. Just suddenly things would go sideways and the guys were actually fighting or attacking one another. So Matt wanted to have that in the story. So I start with that in the story. There's a match between two men, and you find out one of them is a mentor, one of them is a student. Um, and he's a disgraced luchador. He takes it too far. There's a death in the ring. I mean, you could see that much on the Kickstarter. The luchador, Milagro, ends up homeless. He keeps his mask on and he doesn't talk. There's specific reasons for that that I don't explore in this arc. Matt, Ross, and I know why. And again, that's something that I'd like to explore down the road. But but he doesn't talk. He doesn't take off the mask, which is also like a tradition in lucha libre. He has another reason why he doesn't take it off. So there ends up being trouble in Iztapalapa. There's a bit of a cartel angle for people that like that kind of crime angle of things. There's some there's some things that I think people wouldn't expect in the story. Two of the main characters are women, an older woman and a younger woman. There is a community gardening aspect because I read something about ancient Mexican techniques for gardening that were coming back to places like Mexico City. So there's all these different aspects that I threw in there. What else can I tell without giving too much away? There's a pretty, you saw it yourself because you helped out a lot with it, but there is a pretty long fight. There goes my cat. There is a pretty long fight that goes on in one of the chapters that's pretty detailed. So like people that are really into like grappling and MMA and those types of things will probably really appreciate it. That's about all I probably should say about it.
Yeah, but I think we can kind of expand on that a little bit with regards to the fighting. So even though there's like that pro wrestling aspect, when you have these fights that are outside of the ring, you try to make them more realistic, right?
Yeah. So Matt says that Matt Strackbine, the guy who created the character, he says that the comic is rated BV for brutal violence, right? When you watch combat sports, grappling or MMA, people tap, right? There's no tapping on the street. There's no mats, So what would it look like if these guys that had all these skills actually knew what was going on? There is an antagonist who is an MMA fighter that appears in the second chapter. You got to see him. And it's interesting. I wanted to give the guys different fighting styles. Like the antagonist is more Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His boxing style is probably like more of a cross guard, Philly shell type style. I gave Milagro classic tight guard, classic like Julio Cesar Chavez type style. So I think people that are pretty well versed in MMA or combat sports and can see the differences between like jiu-jitsu versus like judo versus like sambo versus like something like wrestling, catch wrestling. I think that they'll pick up on that. And people that don't know about it will just see something that's full of action that looks like it could be more realistic. I mean, how many years have we seen like Superman and Batman like throwing like punches like this or something, or like like a punch and kick at the same time? I mean, like you don't really do that, like in training or in sparring or in a fight or anything like that. That's not going to work unless you're like from the planet Krypton or something. So like I wanted to have things that you see in actual fights, and I wanted to have the different flavors of different arts in the fight.
Well, that sounds really good to me. So that's the thing. I think these like real fights can be entertaining, right? So we've seen it in like the anime Attack on Titan. So we see how realistic fighting can be interesting, and it can be part of the story or it can enhance a story. And people who have no clue about these different martial arts styles or grappling and whatsoever, I think they can still be entertained. So it's like there's a way to do it where it's still it still includes everyone and it still entertains everyone. And so I'm happy that you're trying to make these matches or these fights, these real fights, more real.
Yeah, I think the reason why so many of us love combat sports, whether it's boxing, MMA, grappling, whatever it is, I mean, it's a story, right? Every fight has a story. They have different acts. They have its own structure. They come out, they feel each other out. Things are slow. The fights build up. One fighter starts to dominate. The other guy looks like he's going to lose. The guy comes back in the next round. The guy that was losing comes back and puts it to the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
Or girl, or person, or whoever. But they put it to the other fighter. And it's dramatic. It's its own story. And you watch enough classic fights, you start to see the flows and the stories behind some of these fights, and you watch them over and over, and they're just incredible. Um, yeah, and something else that I did that I think mega fight nerds will pick up on it, but there's three classic fights that MMA fight fans may recognize. There's elements from those fights, specific moves. You saw them when I got your feedback on them, but yeah, and I'm curious to see how many people are going to pick up on those moves, or like, oh, that was from this fight and that was from that fight, and in that sense, I'm pretty lucky too, because I have decades now of great MMA matches to like pick and choose, like, oh, this sequence, this move. Um, and I tried to get some of that in the story as well.
Yeah. So it's like even more realism, right? It's like these things actually happen in real matches, like real MMA matches. So you can't deny the realism, right?
Something that Ross said. Ross does the pencils and inks, our virtuoso. But something that he said, watching it on video helped him out, because we didn't want to necessarily do like a fight manual. We're doing a comic book, or we're doing a graphic novel in this case, but it's essentially a comic, right? We didn't want just like a manual, just showing you how to do moves. We wanted to tell a story. We wanted to have some dramatic elements in it. We wanted to have elements that make comics great, the sequential art and all those types of things. And actually watching these moves and watching them applied in real fights was really helpful to him. It's something that he talked about, like watching actual videos that I'd sent him. And the guy's really done his homework. I mean, he's really been impressive with what he's been able to accomplish. The fight that's on the Kickstarter is more like a pro wrestling match turned into a shoot. So there isn't too much in terms of what you might see, like in terms of, well, I mean, yeah, no, there's elements of catch. There's a German suplex, and there's a Superman punch off the ropes, which could work. So there's definitely elements to that, but we really start to amp it up as the story goes on.
Great, great. So just so people know that when you talk about videos, I think that does help to kind of make it more realistic. And so yeah, when you guys, just to let people know that that since I helped out, so sometimes you would come to me about like how could we make these transitions work, and so then I would make a video and then show you how to do these transitions in a realistic way as well. So that's kind of how I was helping as well.
Well, you also have a background in Sanda, Chinese kickboxing with throws. And
Yes.
I've heard you talk about this because you like the way that it blended with catch, like the striking to the throws really was a good blend for catch. So there's even a couple elements of that, like those transitions between the different ranges of fighting, and how you would go from like throwing a kick, to getting taken down or taking a guy down or doing whatever it is, like all those different setups. To me, it was really important to get that in and to be as authentic as possible, and to give that like little bit of a different flavor to it. So yeah, all of that stuff really makes it in there, and I think I think fight fans will really appreciate it. And the
Okay.
guys that are like me, that are like fight fans and comic nerds, I think they'll really appreciate it. But I mean, I'm biased. What the hell do I know?
No, but it looks great. So actually, can you check if there's any progress on the Kickstarter? Are you see you got it pulled up there?
I got it pulled up. Nothing yet. We're still at 98%. We're $127 to go. I mean, I'm really happy with how this has gone. I didn't expect this. In the back of our minds, we were sweating a little bit, like, oh, what if this makes it to the end of the month and we're like only halfway there or whatever. Because Kickstarter is all or nothing, right? And
Hmm.
but I mean, we'll get it.
Okay. Oh, so you actually, so even though you started on what, Tuesday, you had
Mhm.
30 days to complete the challenge kind of.
Yes.
Wow. Wow, and it's only been a few days and you're already almost there.
Yeah, honestly, right now we're starting to look at the stretch goals because the thing with the more people that get in, the more you're going to get for your money. Like if we hit the one, we were trying to raise 7,000, right? So if we get to our first stretch goal, which is 9,000, there's more things that we're going to add. And then there's another stretch goal. I can't remember if it's 11,000 or 10,000. I can't remember what it is. I'd have to look. But as we get to each stretch goal, there's more rewards and more things that we're going to give out.
Awesome. So hopefully people can be contributing because not only do we need like everyone needs more authentic catch wrestling in their life. They don't even whether they know it or not, or whether they realize it or not, because that's the other thing that maybe it's like a personal thing of me of my own. You don't have to take part in what I'm about to say, but there is like. There's this idea where it's like if you've done pro wrestling, then you automatically know catch wrestling. But I know for a fact because I know a lot of pro wrestlers, and I know the backstory of a lot of pro wrestlers, and they don't truly know. Not all of them truly know catch wrestling, right? It's not going to be built into pro wrestling training. So what I like about the story, or one of the aspects that I like about the story, is that someone can be doing pro wrestling, but you have them being also an authentic catch wrestler. So hopefully people can kind of tell the difference. People can kind of see the difference, um, and hopefully people can be entertained and inspired, and but also educated at the same time. So you don't have to. Uh, tag on to that or whatever if you don't want to, but that's kind of like a thing. That's a motivation for me to to help out with this project, because I want people to know that there's like a real style that pro wrestling came for or evolved from, and it's by itself is a beautiful art, and it was always considered like kind of like a sport plus self-defense. It just didn't really have the full-on punches and kick. Actually, if you go back a few hundred years ago in England, there were kicks allowed. So you can be kicking the shins and all that. Uh, Punching was never allowed. So there was that aspect that evolved over the years, especially when they try to standardize it around like the 1850s. Um, so there's these different realistic aspects, and so it could always have been, or it always was like this mix of sport and real fighting or real combat sport. Um, so I just want people to know that there is that aspect to catch wrestling, and that it is not like it came first, right? It wasn't this kind of like weird kind of hybrid thing or whatever. It's like it came first. Pro wrestling evolved later. So I just want people to know that. I just want people to know that, right? At least.
Well, there's a pragmatic aspect to it as well. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is an incredible art. I mean, we've seen what those guys can do. You see what Danaher's guys are doing. And you see guys like Ryan Hall and MMA. I mean, there's no question about that. That's undeniable. But it's not the only one. There are other arts, and one of the problems with Jiu-Jitsu is it's expensive. Like
Mhm.
most jiu-jitsu gyms, like if they're doing gi, you have to buy a gi. And even if it's like a no gi gym, like they're going to want you to wear their rash guards and certain things. And then like the monthly costs, I mean, it's like $200 a month, which is a lot of money for a lot of us. And
Yep.
something like catch, I mean, a high school kid could could learn amateur wrestling in high school, and then just kind of build off of that without a gi if they wanted to train in like submission grappling. You have like an online thing that I'm eventually gonna try to get on when this is over, and when I can find training partners to be able to do it. But
Yeah. Well, maybe you can do that right now. I just got notification from Matt. He says you guys are funded now, 102% funded.
oh my gosh, hold on a second here. I didn't refresh in time. Wow, thank you, Matt. Thanks, buddy. Thank
Well,
you,
thank
every.
you. Yeah, thanks to if any of you guys who are watching right now, if you funded, if you contributed, uh, thank you. But yeah, this is really great news. This is awesome.
Yeah, this seems, that seems right because I mean you are part of this. Um, but there's a pragmatism. I'm sorry. I'm like wow. I'm really excited by this. I'm all fidgety and stuff. I don't know what to do with my hands.
Yeah. Well, I can talk for a little bit. Go ahead and chill out a little. But like you were making a really good point about the whole idea about how youth can get into this, like how jujitsu. Like, oh man, I don't know. Like, I know you're not in Los Angeles, but in Los Angeles, there are jujitsu gyms where it's like the monthly fee is like what, over $200, or some of them are even more than $200 a month. So a lot of people just cannot afford that, and whether they are even gi or no gi doesn't matter. They're all like expensive. So um, how you were kind of talking or alluding to, where it's like getting youth into wrestling, really doesn't. You don't even need to buy them shoes, or they don't even need to buy shoes, really. Even though that is kind of still a bit of, or like a part of the wrestling outfit. I think that potentially could fade away over time as well, because even a long time ago, we wore the shoes, and then we wore like leggings, but there was no shirt. And then what happened is like it evolved to where it's like the leggings got shorter, and then there's like a little strap that went over, so we have like that, the whole onesie going on, but still the shoes. And I think now we're having, since because like nogi is like such a big, it's becoming a huge sport, and they have allowed in the universities, and I believe in the high schools and stuff, where the wrestlers, they don't have to wear the singlet. They can wear like what looks like, just shorts and a rash guard shirt.
Mhm.
So it'll look exactly like nogi. So then maybe even eventually, since they're already looking like nogi grapplers, maybe the shoes will go too, because it's like if they want to do MMA, there's no shoes. If they want to do nogi, there's no shoes, right? If they want to do whatever, even put on the gi and do gi grappling, jujitsu, no shoes, right? So it's almost, I feel like perhaps the shoes can be gone, in a few generations, I guess, but we'll see.
Yeah, like I said, jujitsu is a great art. It's just not accessible to everybody, and and this happened in Brazil. I mean, like the little bit that I know about luta libre, one of the things was the gi, the lack of the gi, right? Like a lot of people couldn't afford that, so they just did it without the gi, and they did it more from like a catch perspective, and incorporated a lot of that stuff. And you know, how great would it be if that actually happened in Mexico? Like a bunch of, or even like LA, like a bunch of kids like took advantage of this. Like, hey, I can actually afford this. I can actually do it. They can set up clubs. There aren't quite, I haven't seen quite as many like jujitsu clubs or like community jujitsu. You see that with judo. Um,
Hmm.
you see
Yeah.
that with wrestling, but this is another path to submission grappling, another path. Like if somebody wanted to get into MMA and get a grappling base, this is another way to do it. I don't want to dump all over jujitsu. It's not that, but it's not the only way either. There are other ways to learn, and there are other approaches to it. And part of me hopes that like some kid ends up reading Milagro and like gets inspired to learn grappling. That would really be cool.
Yep, I agree. That'd be very, very cool, and that they can feel like it's like more inclusive, and you don't necessarily have to be getting all these kinds of special outfits and shoes or whatever. That's why it's another reason why it's like I'm fine if the shoes kind of evolve out of it, um, because of that. Where it's like, some of these and that's crazy. Like, I don't know if you know, this is something that I've noticed in the past couple of years. It's like just shoes in general are like crazy expensive, and so wrestling shoes are also like a lot of these shoes are like over $100
Yeah.
for like a new pair. So it's like that's like who can really afford that? And it makes it into like this kind of luxury zone where it's like a sport that virtually anybody can do without shoes. They're charging so much for shoes. So I think that's something, or that's like a reason for us to even abandon the shoes sometimes. So not that, I mean, I have wrestling shoes. I mean, I like them. I think some of them look really cool and all that, but it's like, man, they're really, I feel like almost like they're taking advantage of us when they talk, when you look into the pricing of how much these materials and all that stuff, how much it costs to manufacture it. It's not $100. Right?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, can you guys just make them not cost so much, please? And, maybe we'll keep them.
Yeah,
Because
you
we don't
don't.
have to.
Most of your videos, I don't think you wear, like, maybe you wear shoes maybe a third of the time or something, but most of the time you're not. I've noticed you're not wearing shoes, and it's not really like a big part or necessary, or at least that's been my perception of it. But that is something too. Going back to Milagro is the poverty aspect. It's alluded to. Um, you're seeing certain things like that now here in the States, like Terrence Bud Crawford, one of the best fighters fighting right now. He has like a community center in Omaha where you can do fitness and boxing and all kinds of stuff, right? And it's open to pretty much anybody. And in my mind, a lot of this is community based in Milagro. I actually have like an idea for like another arc and another story for how all that goes down. It's alluded to a little bit in this particular arc, but man, if we can keep this going and if we're able to tell some of these stories, I mean, I have some pretty wild plans for Milagro. The character, the storylines, and the rabbit holes that he's going to go down. And I would really love to get into that community aspect, and the poverty aspect, and using combat sports as a way to hopefully get out, which traditionally it's been for a lot of people. I think that's something that could be explored. Like right now, like I said, like jujitsu really doesn't do enough of that, or I don't know if it does it really much at all. I think there's a couple places in Brazil. I know there are some community-based jiu-jitsu places in Brazil, in the favelas. Charles de Bronx, just Charles de Bronx Oliveira just won the belt, and just from what we see from him, he's likely to do something like that with jiu-jitsu. But we just don't see enough of it, and hopefully this is another path for people that are struggling financially, like a lot of us are.
Yeah, I get you though, because like even when I was speaking with different Chinese fighters from China, that's even the perspective they took on Brazilian jiu-jitsu, where it's like, oh, that's just what the rich kids do, and they pay tons of money for classes, and they pay tons of money as entrance fees for jiu-jitsu tournaments. So it's like people like say from these cultures that aren't as awed by Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I think the Chinese culture in particular, people who want to fight, a lot of them are more striking oriented anyway. And so when they look towards grappling style, they don't necessarily know the history of even like UFC and how that was like a big promotion for Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So that's not really in the forefront of a young fighter in China. They just want to know what works. And what they are hearing is that wrestling is dominant in MMA. So they're interested in wrestling, and then already from the beginning, right? So striking and then wrestling. And then when they look towards jujitsu for some of the holds and stuff, they look and then they look for a school and they're like, oh my goodness, this is like really expensive. Whereas I can easily even get kickboxing training for not as expensive And then when they want to do competitions, it's much more easy to get into these. And so a lot of the fighters that I've spoken to from China, that's kind of the perspective where it's like, oh, that's just what do these rich kids do, and just like it's very expensive, all like every aspect. So it kind of goes to what you're saying, where it's like there isn't. They do have their own community, right? Like community of people who can afford to train,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that everyone is like that. There, it doesn't exist. Like there's no community jujitsu. I'm sure it's somewhere, but it's like we're not quite hearing about it.
Yeah, it's in Brazil a little bit. I'm sure there's probably a couple places here. There's always guys that do things in their garage, but it's not my most of what we see are like in big jujitsu gyms, and there's a lot of stuff with the associations and things like it can get kind of ugly.
Yeah,
So hopefully, if nothing else, hopefully like this comic helps people imagine another way to be able to do this if they have like a burning desire to grapple, to fight, to train, to learn how to defend themselves, whatever it is. Like there is another way. You don't have to spend all that money doing jujitsu.
yep, I agree. All right, so we've been speaking for almost an hour. So, is there uh, anything that you like we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up?
We've covered quite a bit here. The biggest thing I want to say, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time, your knowledge. You've been really helpful with this project. I would like PM you at weird times at night and be like, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And you never made me feel weird about it. I really appreciate that. More than anything, man, I want to thank everybody for helping us fund this. I mean, this is unbelievable. This is like a dream come true. This comic, this character. I mean, this is something Matt and we started doing this years ago, and we had a false start. We had a couple artists that we looked at that just didn't work out, and it just kind of fell by the wayside for a few years. And then we got lucky with Ross. The timing was right with him, and he fully embraced this. And now we're actually funded. Now hopefully we can get to those stretch goals. We can get people more art, because I mean you've seen what these guys can do. They're incredible, and you're also a fan of like manga and comics and things. So I know that you can appreciate the level of art that these guys are doing. And I hope we get to do a whole lot more of Milagro, and I just hope people enjoy it, and I'm really grateful that we've gotten the support that we have.
All right, that sounds great. I'm grateful too, even though I'm not an artist or the story person. I'm helping with the fights, but I'm thankful to be part of this project as well, and thankful that it got funded. So hopefully, we can make more, right? So people can see catch wrestling and in realistic fighting scenarios.
Man, I hope we get to a point where we can have Milagro masks. That'd be cool.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, totally.
Ross did a hell of a design for the mask. It's funny, Matt had a really good design. The thing with Ross, he was incredible. Like we had talked about it, he wasn't even sure if he could do it because there was another big project, and I think Dark Horse or somebody was like looking at him for a project, and unfortunately for him, it fell through. But fortunately for us, we got to work with him. But Matt mentioned it to him. He didn't show him anything. They just had a discussion, and I want to say like an hour later, he had like the mask, he had like the singlet, the costume, and everything. Like that'd be cool if we can get to the point where we can supply Milagro masks. I'd be down for that.
Oh, that'd be really cool. And the other thing that would be really cool is that there is a comic book store. Actually, there's plenty of comic book stores in LA, but there was one in my area, and so I checked it out last weekend. And what was cool is they had this big section about supporting local artists. So it'd be kind of cool if Milagro was in that section as well. It wouldn't necessarily be maybe in Colorado, wherever you are, where you guys are. Um, that'd be kind of. I thought it was really cool to see that the comic book stores themselves are actually trying to promote almost like these these smaller artists, not just like these mega like Marvel or whatever, like DC or whatever. Um, and I think that reminded me of like this project here, how it's, doing a Kickstarter and all that. So it's not just like this big budget type thing from the beginning. And so that also adds to the whole community aspect of it as well, where it's like you're having a lot of people working together to make this happen. So it's really amazing that it is happening now. So thank you to everybody. That's awesome.
Yeah, that does remind me. There's a comic book store in Boulder, Time Warp Comics. A friend of ours, Wayne, owns it. That's where I met Matt. You know, I followed Wayne. I followed Time Warp Comics. Matt found me there, and then he was doing like a signing for another project that he had, and he was just doing fan art. That's where we met. I mean, we met because of that, essentially. We met because of a local comic book shop, and it just goes back to the whole bottom-up grassroots thing.
Hmm.
Like Wayne was generous enough to host Matt, and to encourage and support us. And now we're doing this awesome project, and I hope that bottom up grassroots thing just kind of explodes, with art, with training, with whatever it can inspire. Community gardening, there's a big aspect of that, like whatever people are going to get out of it that's positive. And yeah, I just hope people get something good out of it, and there's a butterfly effect of, I don't know, goodness, that of wholesome goodness that comes from this, from the broken limbs and the blood.
That sounds great. That's awesome. So can you tell people where they can find out more, like especially like the social media aspect of Milagro? Can you tell us where to find you?
Yeah, Milagro. If you just go to Kickstarter, you put Milagro in the Kickstarter engine, and the link is also on the bottom of the show notes. You can find it there. We're on Twitter. We don't have a Facebook account. Um, we don't have a website yet. This is still new. Like when we started this, we weren't even sure if we were going to get funded, much less like get funded in like 4 days. This is a little unreal. I've been writing for a while, but I've had a couple things published here and there, but I don't even have like a website or anything. So we're still filling that stuff out. You can Matt Strackbine, you can find him at the Letter Hack, both on Twitter, and I believe if you just Google Letter Hack, you can find him. Ross Radke, Radke is how you spell his last name. If you Google him, he comes up. You can see his comic stomp. I mean, check out that guy's work. That guy's unbelievable. We're so fortunate to have an artist of his caliber on this project.
Yeah, and I think let me see here. What is the Twitter handle for Milagro? It's Comic Milagro.
Comic Milagro, yes.
Yeah. So if you guys are on Twitter, go ahead and check that out. So you can see, what was like. I would recommend you guys follow them on Twitter if you're on Twitter, because they post a bunch of the artwork on there, so you can get a good sense of what it looks like. Um, and even like they post a lot. Like I'm looking at it right now, and they post a lot of cool pics of like them doing the work, really. So it's like
Yeah.
you kind of see it happening as from the black and white to then get colored and stuff. So yeah, definitely recommend that.
Yeah, they're both great guys too, man. Like I brought my son. I remember the first time I met Matt, he did a sketch for my son. He drew my son as a superhero. There was another time I knew a kid who was a teenager that was interested in art. Matt like met with them, spoke with them. Like these guys are really they're great guys. They're really nurturing. Like if an artist can get inspiration or any kind of like technical aspects from what they're doing, by all means, please do.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think this is probably a good place to end it. So I want to thank everyone for listening. Thank you for joining me. Do they know that they can call you Memo? That'd be like the official shortening or the short way to say Guillermo in Spanish. They just
Oh
call
yeah,
you.
Memo. No, Matt and Ross both like to refer to me as Mo. My wife calls me Mo. Memo's even better. I'll take Memo.
Yeah, yeah. There's big time, real famous Memo or Guillermo, who plays for the Mexican national soccer team.
All right.
Yeah, Guillermo Ochoa. He's like they're it's kind of the Spanish word is kind of popping into my head. So it's kind of because when I started thinking about that, then but the goalie, his name is Guillermo, and so then everyone's like excited about Memo, right? So that's
It's
another way they.
Matt did a video that was on the Humanist Report. There's like a short 2 minute video where he pronounces my name without rolling the R, and it's adorable.
Actually, I have one little detail for people since my name is Raul, right?
Raul.
Yeah, and I grew up only, for the first few years of my life, only hearing it pronounced properly in Spanish. Then when I went to school and, like the teachers weren't native Spanish speakers, then actually for a second there, I was like, oh, I hate my name because I hated the way it sounded when they didn't pronounce it the way I was used to. And it almost sounded like bad to my ears. So I was just like, what the hell is it? Or whatever. It's just so, but I got used to, especially since there's such a big mix of people here and not everyone, especially like in LA, like not everyone's going to be even speak English. Right. So,
Yeah.
so I'm used to hearing my name pronounced all kinds of ways now, um, but yeah, my name is what's it, a tongue roller or whatever. So, uh, yeah. So anyway, so hopefully you appreciated hearing Guillermo and but yeah, Memo for short. So tell
Memo.
everyone that.
I'll take it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank everyone for listening. Thank Guillermo for being here, and thank everyone for funding the
Oh,
comic.
yeah, everyone. Thank you so much, guys. I mean, I'm really overwhelmed with the support. We all are. I can't wait to talk to Matt about this. I mean, this is really exciting, and we literally could not have done it without everybody. So thank you.
Great. Okay. So let's everyone help to keep real wrestling alive and also keep Milagro alive too. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, guys.